That's how you see people in their 50s still paying off student loans, or you maybe see like an old person who's working in McDonald's, and maybe it's just a lot of homeless people. Nowadays with the internet, I feel like there are so many different learning opportunities that going through traditional school and traditional jobs and even, your way of renting isn't really necessary anymore. So in this video, I'm going to be showing you straight up the flaws of traditional education or the traditional route and sort of the tips that you can use to sort of beat the system. Now, before we start, like and subscribe to my channel and also click the bell icon, which will let you get alerts of any new videos I post out. Now, for your average person going to college or university, it just doesn't make sense anymore and people are just going to lose out. Now, there are a couple reasons. The first is that tuition is getting more expensive every year. It's increasing, 5 to 10% every year just for no reason. They're teaching the same stuff to you and really they're just making money. School or universities or colleges are a business. It's not really there to, guarantee success or guarantee you a job. That's why you can hear stories of how, say, like your parents might have taken school, it was only like $2,000. But now the same kind of program like years down the line is now tens of thousands of dollars simply because the schools are raising their prices for no really great reason. The next is that the baseline of education nowadays is getting harder and harder. So before, people could just go through high school and kind of work right away after they graduate. But nowadays people have to go through university, the first level of undergraduate programs. But nowadays, it's actually not even enough. People have to move on to masters. And from what I hear, people are having too many masters, or it's just so diluted out there that people are going for their PhDs or their doctorates or some sort of professional level program after masters. So it's pretty much saying you have to spend more time in school, pretty much spend more on tuition, and pretty much learn stuff where it probably doesn't really help you that much down the line. The other reason is that your potential income is not really changing. So why is it that, your targeted $50,000 salary is still that target that most people come out of school thinking that they're going to get? So it doesn't really make sense. So if your tuition starts off at $2,000 to make $50,000, but now your tuition is now $10,000 to make $50,000, you're pretty much not getting more for what you're potentially paying for school. Another reason is that the average person who goes to university or college tends to study something that's completely not employable. Something like archaeology or medieval history. As an employer or a business, how can I expect to hire someone who's studied those kind of programs and I ask them to run the numbers or something, or develop me a strategy or plan some sort of event? These sort of programs don't really prepare you for the real world. So the chances of you kind of coming out of school, being able to get a job right away is just very slim. And lastly, the other reason is that there's so many other programs online that are so much cheaper, more effective, and they just get the job done for you on an educational standpoint. There are platforms such as Coursera, if you haven't heard, where you can take courses from, the best schools in the world, like schools like Harvard, Princeton, Wharton, Yale. You don't have to submit an application. You can just start attending those courses for free. So let me run you the numbers for an example of how a Canadian student would go to university and come out with a job. So first, they would go through a 4-year undergraduate program, and tuition and cost of living, so like rent and food and whatever sort of expenses, really come up to $15,000 per year. And over 4 years, that's $60,000. Then that student would most likely go on and take a master's program for 2 years. Now, a master's program costs a lot more, so you can sort of expect $25,000 per year. And for 2 years, that's $50,000. So when you combine both levels together, you're pretty much coming out with $110,000 in costs or student loans. Now, say if you're lucky and a lot of people that I know graduate from school don't get a job right away. But assume that you did. You come with a job and it pays you $55,000. Now, after, your income taxes, rent, and sort of other modest living expenses, you are pretty much coming out with $15,000 left in sort of your savings. Now, assume, you have $15,000 in savings for a year. You use all of it to pay down your student loans. It would still take you 7 years at the minimum to pay it all off. And great, that's pretty much like a 13-year journey where you went to school for 6 years, then you worked for 7 years to pay off that loan. And you're 30 years old, most likely, with $0 to your name. And how can you think about, starting a family or buying a house? It just doesn't make sense. So the system is kind of rigged for you in a way that you don't win. So there must be ways to sort of improve your chances of winning or beating the system. And the first category to do so is to work your ass off and make money. And the first kind of strategy would be to have like a part-time job while you're in school, or work summers through like a summer job. And this way, over 4 to 6 years, even if you're working minimum wage, you can save up some money and eventually use it to pay down these costs. So even if you're making, say, like $10,000 in a whole year, and you save that for 4 to 6 years, you can pretty much cut that entire student cost by half. The other strategy is to apply for internships with companies during your summer terms. This way you're able to make more money because internships often pay more than minimum wage, and you're able to get experience in your field of interest. If you're applying for university or college, you should try for programs that have a co-op option. And if you didn't know, co-op is basically a side option that some programs have that let you get internships throughout your years in school. And these internships are exclusive to co-op students only. Another strategy is to create a business online. Nowadays with the internet, it's just so easy to make money online, and there's so many tools out there to help you. And also when you're in school, the government is often very helpful, very supporting for students in terms of creating a business, or just having the right resources or the right sort of mentorship opportunities. The next category is to avoid graduate programs, just because they cost way too much. Now, unless what you want to do in your life actually requires you to go through more schooling, something like being a doctor or lawyer or engineer, I wouldn't recommend it. And also in the previous section, I was talking about work and pretty much all the ways you can sort of advance your career. In that sense, if you really did get a job right after 4 years of university, you could totally avoid graduate school tuition costs, which would be a step up in terms of less amounts to pay in the future, and you're able to make more money just because you get your career started faster. Now, a lot of people sort of argue that going to an MBA or sort of a master's program lets you to network with people within your class or with alumni. I mean, it's sort of a weird sort of reasoning behind it. Suddenly going back to school doesn't suddenly make you a better networker. And I believe there's so many different ways to do so for free. And the weird thing about going back to a master's is that you sort of become back a needy, job hunter instead of someone who already has a job and can provide value. And that's what I would sort of appreciate more in a networking sort of session with someone else. Some people rationalize that they need to do a graduate program in order to specialize in a field. But nowadays, there's just so many different certifications and sort of special programs that let you specialize very cheaply and more effectively, just because they're more recognized in the industry. Something like accounting, finance, marketing, sales, real estate, sort of you name it, there's probably something out there. The last category is to adjust the rent that you're paying. Rent is pretty much half of what you sort of would pay when you're in school, and it becomes even more when you graduate school and maybe you live in the city or you live outside in like a home or an apartment, townhouse, whatever. So the first tip is to really just live at home. So you don't have to pay any rent. Just living at home with your family or your siblings or whoever is with you is the best way to sort of lower the cost, because you're not paying anything more than you have to, which is zero. But say if you do have to, it's best to have roommates to split the cost. It's always easier to have someone who splits the overall cost when really you don't stay at home that much, because half of the time you're either in school or you're at work. So it's better to just have someone who's in there utilizing the location that you're living in. During the 4 months of summer, when you are not using the rental, it's best to sublet it out to someone else. Just have some extra income or extra cost savings by not spending more on rent, especially when you're not living there. Or a new strategy is to try Airbnb it out. That way you can actually make even more money in such a shorter time. Before you find your place, and if you decide to work, it's best if you find a place that's close to your work. If you're working at the mall, or say you're working close to campus, it's best to find a place that's close to the workplace. This way you're able to work more hours, you don't have to spend time traveling, and you basically can tell your boss that you're committed to more hours in the work schedule. Another strategy is something called househacking. And this is where you would own a house and you would rent out the bedrooms to roommates so that you would generate rental income, and the rental income would pretty much cover your cost of living and the mortgage itself. But a more modified version of this is where you don't really want to own the house or you can't afford the whole thing, so that you would actually be the sole renter of an entire house, and you would rent out the extra bedrooms to the point where the costs are covered by these roommates. So let me give you an example. Let's say that there's a house out close to a university or say close to your workplace, and it costs $1,500 a month, and it has 4 or 5 bedrooms. So what you would do is you would live in one of the bedrooms, but you'd rent out the other 3 to 4 bedrooms to roommates, charging $500 a month. And what happens is that you're able to generate $1,500 to $2,000 in rental income, which is more than enough to cover your rent on the entire house. And if say you actually went for 5 bedrooms, you would be able to make money out of it just for doing nothing.